History is being written in West Africa, where Senegal has made a groundbreaking decision. It is preparing to abandon the CFA franc, a currency created in the colonial era and still used by more than 10 African nations today. For decades, critics have denounced the CFA as a tool of economic dependence, a financial chain that kept African economies tied to Paris. But now, Senegal is taking a bold step to break free, and this time, it is not acting alone. Along with its regional partners, Senegal is working toward the launch of a new currency called the ECO, which is expected to roll out in 2027. Supporters call this an historic leap toward monetary independence, but the move also raises tough questions. Can Senegal and its neighbors truly succeed in building a new financial system? Will France quietly step aside as its influence shrinks? And how do ordinary Senegalese citizens view this ambitious project, as the beginning of freedom or just another promise that may never come to life? The answers to these questions could reshape the future of West Africa and redefine its relationship with the world. For France, this change signals yet another crack in its long-held grip over Africa. Across the Sahel, French political and military influence has already been fading, and now the challenge is reaching the financial system itself. At the center of this rebellion stands Senegal, led by a new political duo, President Bassirou Diomaye Faye and Prime Minister Ousmane Sonko. The idea of rejecting the CFA franc is not new. In fact, it was one of Faye's boldest campaign promises. He assured voters that Senegal would no longer remain chained to a colonial currency and that the nation would instead embrace a system that reflected sovereignty and pride. When he won the presidency in 2024, he repeated this pledge with conviction, giving people hope for a fresh chapter. But soon after, his tone shifted. Instead of charging directly against France, he began speaking of cooperation and closer partnership, which to many felt like betrayal. Was this promise only a political slogan? Or was Senegal's young president already bowing to pressure from Paris? For a while, it seemed that the dream of a sovereign currency, the ECO, was slipping away. Yet, beneath the surface, preparations were still moving forward. President Faye's strategy may not be to sever ties completely, but to redefine the relationship with France, one based not on dependency, but on equality. His recent actions underline this message. He ended Senegal's decades-long defense pact with France, sending French troops home, and closing a chapter of unquestioned foreign military presence. Then came an even more significant move. He once again declared Senegal's intention to abandon the CFA franc and embrace the new regional currency, the ECO. Together, these steps signal a determination to move beyond the colonial past while still keeping doors open for cooperation on new terms. To understand the weight of this decision, it is important to revisit the CFA franc's origins. Officially created on December 26, 1945, the currency was not born out of African initiative, but introduced by France under General Charles de Gaulle. Its purpose was clear: bind France's colonies into a single financial system that kept their resources flowing toward Paris. While Europe enjoyed the benefits of unity, Africa remained locked into a structure of dependency. Nearly 8 decades later, the CFA franc is still in circulation across 14 African countries, split between two major currency unions in West and Central Africa. But behind its appearance of stability lies a mechanism that gives France enormous leverage. By design, the CFA franc is pegged to the euro, and half of the foreign reserves of its member states must be deposited in a French treasury account. In simple terms, billions of euros that should be funding African development sit in vaults in Paris. Supporters of the CFA franc argue that this system guarantees stability. They point out that CFA countries have avoided hyperinflation and major financial collapses, presenting it as a shield in an uncertain global economy. But critics see it differently. For them, the CFA franc represents stagnation rather than progress, dependency rather than security. Because the currency is pegged to the euro, it remains artificially strong, making African exports more expensive and less competitive on the global market. At the same time, imports from countries with weaker currencies like China become cheaper, flooding African markets and crippling local industries. This leaves CFA nations trapped in their colonial role, exporters of raw materials and importers of finished goods. Decades after independence, they remain unable to industrialize and chart their own economic destinies. The true beneficiaries of the CFA system are not the ordinary citizens of West Africa, but foreign corporations and elites. French companies enjoy easy access to African markets, while African businesses struggle to compete. Local elites, politicians, bankers, and businessmen benefit from the security of having their wealth tied to France, while ordinary workers, farmers, and traders are left behind. For them, the CFA franc is not a lifeline but a barrier to opportunity. It is this reality that fuels the push for change. Leaders such as Senegal's Bassirou Diomaye Faye and Burkina Faso's Ibrahim Traoré are determined to bury the CFA once and for all. And they are not alone. Public opinion across the region strongly supports the move. Even French media have acknowledged that abandoning the CFA franc is one of the most popular reforms among West African citizens. The question now is whether this vision can be turned into reality. The eco-currency represents more than just money. It is a symbol of freedom, unity, and the possibility of Africa controlling its own economic future. But it also comes with enormous challenges: coordinating policies across multiple nations, ensuring financial stability, and resisting the pressures of powerful external actors. What is clear, however, is that Africa's younger generation is no longer willing to accept colonial relics disguised as progress. They see the ECO as a chance to finally open the door to genuine sovereignty. Whether it succeeds or fails, history will remember this moment as the time West Africa dared to challenge one of the last chains of colonial rule. The CFA franc has long been seen as a symbol of French control in Africa, a currency rooted in colonial history that still lingers decades after independence. But change is stirring. Across the Sahel, nations like Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger have already walked away from this system, fueling a wave of anti-colonial momentum. Now Senegal is stepping into the spotlight with its own bold vision. If it abandons the CFA franc, what comes next? The answer is the ECO, a new currency that could reshape West Africa's financial future. The ECO itself is not a brand new idea. It was first announced in July 2019 by ECOWAS, the Economic Community of West African States. Leaders envisioned it as a single currency to unite the region and promote real independence. The launch was scheduled for 2020, but the COVID-19 pandemic derailed those plans. Today, however, the project is being revived. In Abuja, Nigeria, finance ministers and central bank chiefs recently gathered to reaffirm their commitment. Their message was clear: the ECO is alive, and its purpose is to strengthen trade, fuel growth, and give Africa a stronger voice in the global economy. Senegal, under President Bassirou Diomaye Faye and Prime Minister Ousmane Sonko, is placing itself at the forefront of this movement. On paper, the ECO promises sovereignty and freedom from France's economic grip, but the path ahead is far from simple. Within ECOWAS itself, divisions remain. Leaders like Ivory Coast President Alassane Ouattara continue to defend the CFA franc. In 2019, after meeting with Emmanuel Macron in Paris, Ouattara dismissed calls for reform as unnecessary, praising the CFA franc as a strong and stable system. His position reflects his long-standing reputation as one of France's closest allies in the region. This division poses a serious challenge. How can a single regional currency succeed if not all members share the same vision? And then comes the external challenge: France itself. Will Paris simply accept the collapse of its most effective tool of influence in Africa? History suggests the opposite. Whenever a country has tried to break away from the CFA system, France has responded forcefully. In the 1960s, Guinea introduced its own national currency, only to be destabilized by waves of counterfeit notes that flooded its economy. Mali, too, attempted to abandon the CFA franc in 1962, launching the Malian franc. But internal weaknesses combined with French pressure eventually forced the country back into the CFA zone by 1984. Ivory Coast offers another lesson. In 2011, then President Laurent Gbagbo considered moving his country away from the CFA. After a disputed election, French troops backed by the UN intervened, supporting Ouattara and removing Gbagbo from power. The violence left over 3,000 people dead. While Ouattara emerged victorious and secured France's interests, Gbagbo was dragged to the International Criminal Court, where he spent nearly a decade fighting charges before finally being acquitted. The message was clear: challenging the CFA system comes at a cost. France has also wielded economic weapons to maintain control. During Ivory Coast's crisis, Paris used its influence within the West African Central Bank to block funds, while major French banks shut down operations in the country, cutting it off from financial stability. This form of economic warfare ensured that any attempt to move away from the CFA was crushed before it could succeed. This is the shadow hanging over Senegal's ECO project. The launch date of 2027 may be ambitious, But history warns that France will not give up its economic stronghold without a fight. And Paris still has powerful allies within ECOWAS. With Ouattara in office, France can influence the project from within, stalling decisions and creating divisions that may weaken the ECO before it even begins. Still, Senegal is preparing for every possibility. President Faye has made it clear that if the ECO fails, his nation will not hesitate to create its own sovereign currency. Plans have already been outlined. These include establishing an independent central bank that can finance the state at zero interest, building gold reserves at home instead of exporting them abroad, restructuring or even canceling certain debts, and creating a national stock exchange to direct investment toward local industries rather than foreign corporations. It is an ambitious, revolutionary plan that signals Senegal is ready to reclaim its financial destiny. What makes this moment different from past struggles is that Senegal is not alone. A new generation of African leaders is rising. In Burkina Faso, Captain Ibrahim Traoré has expelled French forces and spoken openly about sovereignty. In Mali, Colonel Assimi Goïta has charted his own independent course. And in Niger, Abdourahmane Chiani has also rejected the old order. Together, these leaders represent a growing wave of resistance against neocolonial systems. For Senegal, success would be more than just a financial win. It would be a symbol of dignity and independence for all of West Africa. But failure could strengthen the grip of the CFA Franc and prolong France's influence for decades. The stakes could not be higher. This is not just about money. It is about sovereignty, self-determination, and the right of African nations to control their own future. So the question remains, will Senegal and its allies finally break free from the CFA Franc? Or will history repeat itself, with France once again moving to protect its empire of influence? The answer will determine whether Africa enters a new chapter of independence or remains bound to the chains of its colonial past.